Shout at me again and I'll end you, the waitress warned. Right. Then the Mafia boss dropped to his knees. The coffee pot shattered against the wall 3 inches from Nara Quinn's face. She didn't flinch. 26 years of surviving had taught her exactly when to move and when to stay perfectly still. Right now, staying still was the only thing keeping this situation from becoming a bloodbath. Rico DeLanzo stood 6 feet away, his chest heaving, his $1,000 suit jacket thrown across a booth, his gold watch catching the fluorescent light of Mel's diner. The veins in his neck pulsed. His fists opened and closed like he was trying to decide what to break next. The other customers had stopped breathing, forks froze in midair, conversations dead. Even the cook had gone quiet in the back. And Nara knew for a fact that man had seen 3 shootings and never stopped flipping pancakes. But this was different. Everyone in Atlanta knew Rico DeLanzo. Everyone knew what happened to people who embarrassed him. And everyone knew that the waitress standing in front of him with coffee stains on her white uniform had just told him no. No, she wouldn't give him her number. No, she wouldn't smile prettier. No, she wouldn't come to his table when he snapped his fingers like she was some kind of dog. Rico stepped closer. His cologne hit her first. Expensive. The kind that cost more than her rent. You know who I am? His voice dropped low, dangerous, meant only for her. Nara met his eyes. Dark brown. Almost black in this light. The kind of eyes that had probably made 100 women forget their own names. She wasn't one of them. I know exactly who you are, she said. Her voice came out steady, calm, like she was reading the lunch specials. And I'm going to tell you something that nobody in this city has ever told you. The diner held its breath. Shout at me again, Nara continued, and I will end you. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Rico's jaw tightened. A muscle twitched near his eye. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke, and Nara wondered if this was the moment she'd finally pushed too far. Then Rico DeLanzo did something that made every person in that diner question reality itself. He dropped to his knees. Right there on the checkered linoleum floor, surrounded by shattered glass and cold coffee, the most powerful man in the city knelt before a waitress making $8 an hour plus tips. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Nara's heart slammed against her ribs. She kept her face neutral, kept her hands loose at her sides, but inside she was screaming. This wasn't supposed to happen. Men like Rico didn't kneel. They didn't bow. They certainly didn't look up at a woman with something that looked almost like respect burning in their eyes. What's your name? He asked. Quiet now. Completely different from the man who'd been throwing coffee pots 30 seconds ago. She shouldn't answer. She should walk away, clock out, disappear into the night and pray he forgot her face by morning. But Nara Quinn had stopped running from things a long time ago. Nara, she said, and I don't want your money, your attention, or your apology. I want you to get off my floor and leave my diner. Rico rose slowly, brushing off his knees like he hadn't just humiliated himself in front of 24 witnesses. His eyes never left hers. Nara, he repeated, tasting the name. I'm going to remember that. He collected his jacket, dropped $500 bills on the counter, and walked out without another word. The diner erupted the moment the door closed. Gasps, whispers, phones appearing from pockets. Nara ignored all of it. She grabbed a broom and started sweeping up the glass, her hands finally trembling now that nobody was watching. She thought it was over. She was wrong. Across the street, hidden in a black Mercedes with tinted windows, a man named Soren Vale lowered his camera and whispered, "Got you." What Nara didn't know was that she'd just started a war. And what Rico didn't know was that his enemy had been waiting for exactly this moment. The question isn't whether Nara can survive what's coming. The question is whether she'll destroy both men before they destroy each other. The video hit the internet before Nara finished her shift. By midnight, 17 different accounts had posted clips from inside the diner. Shaky phone footage, blurry angles, but every single one captured the same impossible moment. Rico DeLanzo on his knees. By morning, the city had a new obsession. They called her the waitress who broke Rico. They made memes. They made TikToks. They dug through every database they could find, searching for anything about the woman who'd done what nobody thought possible. But Nara Quinn was a ghost. No social media, no LinkedIn, no tagged photos from college parties or high school reunions. Just a name on a lease and a work schedule at a diner that most people had never heard of until yesterday. The mystery made everything worse. Rico sat in his penthouse 30 floors above the city, watching the same clip for the 47th time. The way she'd stood there. The way her voice hadn't wavered. The way she'd looked at him like he was nothing. Nobody looked at him like he was nothing. He paused the video on her face, studied the sharp line of her jaw, the fullness of her lips, the way her eyes held secrets that he suddenly needed to know. His phone buzzed. His assistant. His lawyer, his mother, he ignored them all. Across town, Soren Vale sat in a warehouse that smelled like rust and money. He'd watched the same video exactly once. That was all he needed. Soren didn't care about Rico's humiliation. He cared about leverage. And that waitress, whoever she was, had just become the most valuable piece on the board. He made 3 phone calls. By the 3rd, he had her address, her work history, and the name of every person she'd spoken to in the past 6 months. Find out what she loves, he told his men. Find out what she'd die for. Then take it. Nara walked home that night the same way she always did. Headphones in, pepper spray in her pocket, eyes tracking every shadow. She knew something had shifted. She could feel it in the way strangers looked at her now, the way cars slowed when they passed. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked her door, and stopped. Something was wrong. The air smelled different, like someone else's cologne. Like someone had been breathing in her space, touching her things, standing where she was standing right now. She scanned the room. Nothing obviously missing. Nothing obviously moved. But Nara had grown up with a father who'd taught her to notice everything, and right now every nerve in her body was screaming. She backed out slowly, phone already in her hand, thumb hovering over 3 numbers she prayed she wouldn't need to dial. That's when she saw it. A car parked across the street. Black, windows tinted, engine running. And inside, just barely visible through the glass, a man watching her with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Nara's blood went cold. Somewhere in that same city, Rico DeLanzo muttered to himself in the dark of his penthouse. Nara, he said, staring at her frozen image on his screen. You've made the wrong man curious. But Rico wasn't the only one watching, and he wasn't the most dangerous. 3 days later, Nara came home to chaos. The door hung open on broken hinges. The lock had been torn clean from the frame, splinters scattered across the hallway carpet like confetti after a funeral. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She stepped inside and let the destruction wash over her in waves. Couch cushions slashed. Drawers emptied onto the floor. Her grandmother's dishes shattered against the kitchen tile. Every photo, every book, every small piece of her life that she'd managed to hold on to scattered and stomped and ruined. But she didn't cry until she reached the closet. The box was gone. The small wooden box her father had given her the week before he died. The one that held his old boxing gloves. The ones he'd worn when he'd taught her everything she knew about fighting and surviving and never letting anyone see her break. Gone. Nara sank to her knees in the wreckage of her own life and let herself fall apart for exactly 60 seconds. She counted each one. Then she stood, wiped her face, and started looking for clues. She found a business card tucked under her pillow. No name, just a phone number and 2 words written in black ink. Stay useful. The gloves arrived 2 days later. A delivery driver handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. No return address, no note. Just the gloves her father had worn for 30 years. The leather, now blackened and curling, burned until they were barely recognizable. Nara stood on the sidewalk outside her temporary motel room and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that made people stupid. The cold kind. The patient kind. The kind that waited and watched and planned until the moment was exactly right. Whoever had done this wanted her scared. Wanted her running. Wanted her broken and begging for mercy from men who had none to give. They had miscalculated badly. She didn't know it yet. But miles across the city, Rico DeLanzo was having the same reaction for very different reasons. His contact had called at 3 a.m. Someone had hit the waitress. Someone had violated her space, stolen from her, sent a message that reeked of Soren Vale's particular brand of cruelty. Rico sat in the dark of his office, bourbon untouched in his hand, trying to understand why he cared. He shouldn't care. She was nothing to him. A stranger. A waitress who'd embarrassed him in front of people who would now whisper about that moment forever. He should be glad someone was making her pay. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing there, unafraid, unbroken, looking at him like he was just a man, not a monster, not a king, just a man who'd lost his temper and needed to be checked. Nobody had checked him in 15 years. His phone rang. One of his men. "Boss, we found a note at her place. Soren's signature. He's already making moves." Rico's grip tightened on the glass. "Find out everything," he said quietly. "Who touched her? Who gave the order? Who delivered those gloves? I want names by morning." His man hesitated. "Boss, with respect, why do we care about some waitress?" Rico didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. All he knew was that Soren Vale had crossed a line and someone was going to pay in blood. He gave one final order before hanging up. "Start with Soren, and make sure he knows I'm coming." Rico DeLanzo hadn't thought about his mother in 3 years. She died on a Tuesday in a hospital that smelled like bleach and broken promises. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, the kind that takes everything slowly, cruelly, letting you watch someone you love disappear piece by piece until there's nothing left but bones and breathing. He'd been 22, already building his empire, already becoming the man everyone feared. But in that hospital room, holding her hand while machines beeped and nurses whispered, he'd been nothing but a boy who wanted his mama to open her eyes one more time. She never did. Now, sitting in his office at 4 a.m, he couldn't stop thinking about the parallels. His mother had worked 3 jobs: waitress at a diner in Decatur, housekeeper at a hotel downtown, night shift at a laundromat that paid under the table. She'd destroyed her body to keep him fed, keep him clothed, keep him believing that he could be something more than another statistic from the wrong side of Atlanta. Nara reminded him of her, not in looks. His mother had been short, round, with hands that were always cracked from cleaning chemicals and smiles that she saved only for him. Nara was tall, sharp, built like a fighter even when she was carrying plates of eggs and bacon. But the eyes were the same. That look of someone who had seen the worst that life could offer and decided to keep going anyway. Rico poured another bourbon, drank it in one swallow, let the burn settle in his chest while he tried to make sense of what he was feeling. His men thought he was going soft. He'd heard them whispering when they thought he wasn't listening. The great Rico DeLanzo, chasing after some waitress like a lovesick teenager, throwing resources at a problem that wasn't his problem, making enemies over a woman who'd publicly humiliated him. They didn't understand. He barely understood himself. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Soren Vale had touched something that belonged to him. Whether Nara knew it or not, whether she wanted it or not, she was under his protection now. And Rico DeLanzo protected what was his. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "She's training again. Old gym on Moreland. Goes every night after midnight. Alone." Rico read the message 3 times. Training. What was she training for? What did she know that made her prepare like she was going to war? He grabbed his keys before he could talk himself out of it. 30 minutes later, he stood in the shadows outside a boxing gym that should have been condemned years ago. The windows were mostly cardboard and plastic sheeting. The sign had fallen off sometime in the last decade. But inside, through a gap in the boards, he could see her. Nara moved like water around the heavy bag. Jab, jab, cross, slip left, counter right. Her footwork was beautiful, precise, the kind that came from years of practice and a teacher who knew what they were doing. She wasn't just throwing punches. She was telling a story with her body. A story about loss and pain and refusing to stay down no matter how many times life knocked her flat. Rico watched until his legs ached from standing still. Watched until his heart did something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. Watched until he understood exactly what kind of woman Soren Vale had decided to target. A warrior. His men would arrive soon with their reports, names, locations, weaknesses to exploit. But Rico already knew how this was going to end. He pulled out his phone and made one call. Double the security on Soren's operation. I want to know every move he makes before he makes it. And send someone to watch that gym. If anyone besides her goes in or out, I want to know immediately. His second-in-command sounded confused. Boss, are we protecting her or surveilling her? Rico stared through the gap in the boards. Watch Nara throw a combination that would have dropped most men. Both, he said. For now, both. He hung up and disappeared into the night, carrying questions he wasn't ready to answer. But one thing echoed in his mind as he drove back to his penthouse. If Soren comes for her, he'll have to kill me first. The heavy bag swung back at Nara like a pendulum of pain, and she met it with everything she had left. Jab, jab, cross, hook. Her knuckles screamed, her shoulders burned. Sweat dripped from her chin onto the cracked concrete floor of a gym that hadn't seen a health inspector since the Clinton administration. She didn't care. Move your feet, baby girl. Her father's voice echoed in her head, clear as the day he'd first wrapped her hands when she was 12 years old. Can't hit what you can't catch. Can't catch what never stops moving. Nara pivoted left, threw an uppercut that snapped the bag backward, danced away before it could swing back and catch her off balance. Malachi Quinn had been dead for 7 years, but she still trained like he was watching from the corner. Still heard his corrections in her head when her form got sloppy. Still felt his hands guiding her shoulders into proper position when exhaustion made her lazy. He'd been a boxer, never famous, never rich. Just a man from Savannah who'd learned to fight in a youth center that kept him off the streets, then spent the rest of his life teaching other kids the same lessons. The footwork had come first. Before she ever threw a punch, he'd made her spend 6 months just learning to move, bounce and shuffle, in and out, circle left, circle right. Make yourself a target that never sits still. The combinations came later. Basic at first. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, then more complex. Body shots to bring the guard down, then headshots to finish. Feints to create openings. Counters off the slip. By the time she was 16, she'd won 3 amateur titles and had scouts from 2 colleges leaving messages on their answering machine. Then her father got sick, and everything stopped. Nara hit the bag harder, felt her grief transform into velocity, into impact, into something she could control when everything else had fallen apart. She'd quit boxing to take care of him, quit school, quit dreaming about the life she might have had. Spent 2 years watching the strongest man she'd ever known wither away from something the doctors couldn't even name until it was too late. After the funeral, she'd packed everything she owned into a single duffel bag and run as far as her savings would take her. Ended up in Atlanta. Ended up at Mel's Diner. Ended up trying to build a new life on the ashes of everything she'd lost. But now someone had burned her father's gloves, and the woman who'd walked away from violence was remembering exactly why she'd been so good at it. Her legs buckled. She caught herself on the bag, chest heaving, muscles screaming for mercy. Get up. Her father's voice again. Fights don't stop because you're tired. Neither does life. Nara gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright, shook out her arms, found her stance. One more round, then another. Then however many it took to be ready for whatever was coming, because something was definitely coming. She could feel it the way she'd always felt a good punch before it landed. A shift in the air, a change in pressure, the universe warning her to move or get hit. She wasn't going to be anyone's victim. Not Rico's. Not Soren's. Not anyone's ever again. The bag swung back. She met it with a right cross that echoed through the empty gym like a gunshot. Outside, hidden in shadows she never thought to check, Rico Delanzo watched through a gap in the boarded window. He saw her nearly collapse from exhaustion, saw her force herself to stand on legs that were trembling, saw the fire in her eyes that not even complete depletion could extinguish. And he knew with a certainty that terrified him that he was already in far deeper than he'd ever intended to go. His phone buzzed, a message from his men, Soren's team mobilizing. They have her gym location, moving tonight. Rico's hand curled into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. He had maybe an hour before Soren's people arrived, maybe less. He pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Send everyone," he said quietly. "And I mean everyone. We get there before Soren does, or we don't get there at all." He hung up and stared through the gap at Nara, still fighting shadows in a gym that was about to become a battlefield. If Soren comes for her, he thought again, feeling the words settle into his bones like a promise. He'll have to kill me first. What do you think? Will Rico make it in time, or is Soren about to take everything from Nara all over again? The tracker was smaller than a dime. Soren Vale held it between his thumb and forefinger, watching the tiny red light blink in the dim light of his warehouse office. 37 of these little devices were now scattered across Atlanta, attached to everything Nara Quinn touched. Her car, her locker at work, her gym bag, the sole of her backup sneakers, even the umbrella she kept by her motel room door. She couldn't breathe without him knowing about it. His men had been good, professional. They'd moved through her life like ghosts, planting eyes and ears in every corner while she slept or worked or beat herself bloody against that heavy bag night after night. Soren appreciated dedication. He really did. But dedication without power was just another word for suffering, and Nara Quinn was about to learn that lesson in ways she'd never forget. His phone buzzed, one of his scouts. "She's at the gym again. Same time, same routine. Rico's got 2 men watching the front, but there's a service entrance on the east side they haven't covered." Soren smiled. Rico Delanzo thought he was smart, thought throwing a few bodyguards at the problem would be enough to protect his new obsession. But Rico had always been emotional, sloppy, too caught up in playing the gentleman gangster to remember that real power came from being willing to do what others wouldn't. "How many men can you get there in 20 minutes? 8. Maybe 10 if I pull from the docks." "Pull from the docks. I want this clean. No witnesses, no traces, just the girl in my trunk by midnight." He hung up and turned to the wall behind his desk. Photographs covered every inch. Nara at the diner, Nara walking home, Nara at the grocery store, the laundromat, the gym. Her entire life mapped out in glossy 4x6 images, and in the center, circled in red marker, a single shot of Rico Delanzo on his knees. That image had been worth more than gold. Soren had sent copies to every major player in the city, anonymous, of course. Just a reminder that the great Rico Delanzo could be humbled by a waitress with an attitude problem. The whispers had started immediately. Questions about Rico's strength, doubts about his judgment, cracks in an empire that had seemed unshakable just 2 weeks ago. But Soren wanted more than cracks. He wanted complete destruction. And Nara Quinn was going to help him get it. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Kidnap the girl. Hold her somewhere Rico would eventually find out about. Let him come charging in like the lovesick fool he was becoming. Then document everything. Rico Delanzo starting a war over a woman he barely knew. Rico DeLanzo, abandoning business meetings and neglecting his operations because he couldn't stop thinking about a waitress. Rico DeLanzo, weak. By the time Soren was finished, every partner, every ally, every person who'd ever feared Rico's name would see him for what he really was. Just a man. Just flesh and blood. Just another target. Across the city, Nara finished her warm-up routine and started wrapping her hands. The gym was quiet tonight. Too quiet. The usual sounds of the street seemed muffled, distant, like the world was holding its breath. She tried to shake the feeling. Paranoia was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every minute spent looking over her shoulder was a minute she wasn't preparing for what was coming. But her father's voice whispered in the back of her mind. Trust your gut, baby girl. It knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet. Her gut was screaming. She moved to the window, peered through a crack in the boards. The street looked empty, normal, a few parked cars, a streetlight flickering on the corner. Then she saw it. A shadow that didn't belong. A shape in a doorway across the street that was too still, too patient, too focused on this building to be coincidence. Nara's heart rate spiked, but her hands stayed steady. She'd learned a long time ago that panic was a killer. Fear was fine. Fear kept you sharp. But panic made you stupid. And stupid got you dead. She backed away from the window, grabbed her phone. No signal. Of course, they were jamming her. Professional. Organized. Coming for her with the kind of planning that suggested serious money and serious motivation. She had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. The front door was out. They'd be expecting that. The back exit led to an alley she didn't know, which meant potential ambush points she couldn't predict. That left the roof. Nara grabbed her bag and ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, her boxing shoes silent on the concrete steps. Behind her, a door opened somewhere on the ground floor. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Moving fast. And a voice she didn't recognize calling out, "Check the training room first. She's here somewhere." Nara didn't look back. She just climbed. The trap was closing and she was running out of places to hide. Rico threw his phone across the room hard enough to crack the screen. "What do you mean they're not answering?" His second in command, a man named Desmond who'd been with him for 11 years, kept his voice level. "Both units went dark 6 minutes ago. Last check-in, everything was normal. Then nothing. Nothing." That word bounced around Rico's skull like a bullet looking for something vital to hit. Soren had moved. Soren had actually moved, and Rico's men had missed it. And now Nara was alone in that gym with God knows how many killers closing in. He was already reaching for his jacket when Desmond stepped in front of him. "Boss, think about this. We don't know how many men he's got there. We don't know the layout. Running him blind is exactly what he wants you to do. Get out of my way." "Rico." Desmond had never used his first name. Not once in 11 years. "If you die tonight, everything falls apart. Everything you built, everything your mother sacrificed for. Gone. Because you couldn't wait 30 minutes for backup." The mention of his mother hit like a body shot. Low, hard. The kind that stole your breath and made your legs want to buckle. Rico stopped, forced himself to think past the red haze clouding his vision. Desmond was right. Running in alone was suicide. Soren would have planned for exactly that kind of reaction. Would have men waiting to cut Rico down the moment he showed his face. But waiting meant leaving Nara alone with those animals. Waiting meant trusting that she could survive whatever they had planned until help arrived. His mind flashed to the gym, to the way she'd moved around that heavy bag. The precision, the power, the look in her eyes that said she'd been fighting her whole life and wasn't about to stop now. Maybe she could survive. Maybe she was tougher than anyone Soren had ever tried to break. Or maybe he was just telling himself that because he was afraid to admit the truth. "How long until backup arrives?" he asked quietly. 20 minutes, maybe 15 if they push it. 15 minutes was an eternity. 15 minutes was enough time to do things to a person that they'd never recover from. Rico closed his eyes, saw his mother in that hospital bed, saw the way she'd looked at him in those final moments, like she was trying to memorize his face because she knew she'd never see it again. She'd told him something that day, something he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten. Don't become the monster, baby. The world already has enough of those. Be the man I raised you to be. Be good. He hadn't been good, not for years. He'd become exactly what she'd warned him against, and he'd told himself it was necessary, told himself it was survival, told himself she'd understand if she could see what he'd built. But she wouldn't understand. She'd look at him with those disappointed eyes, and she'd ask him one simple question. When did you stop being my son? Rico opened his eyes, made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it all. Call Terrence. Tell him to bring the car around. We're going now. Desmond started to protest, but Rico cut him off with a look that reminded everyone in the room exactly why they followed him. I'm not sending men to do something I'm not willing to do myself. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. Now get me to that gym before Soren takes something else from that girl. He was out the door before anyone could argue. The drive took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of watching the city blur past. 12 minutes of imagining every terrible thing that could be happening while he sat useless in the back of a car. By the time they pulled up 2 blocks from the gym, Rico had already made peace with whatever was about to happen. If Nara was dead, he'd burn Soren's entire operation to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. If she was alive, he'd get her out. And then he'd burn it anyway. Either way, Soren Vale had made his last mistake. Rico stepped out of the car, checked the gun at his hip, and started walking toward the sound of chaos. Boss. Terrence's voice came through his earpiece. We've got movement on the east side. Looks like 3, maybe 4 hostiles. And something else. What? A pause, then with unmistakable amazement in his voice. I think she's fighting back. The first man came through the stairwell door expecting an easy target. Nara gave him a jab straight to the throat that dropped him gasping before he could even raise his weapon. The second man was smarter. He hung back, let his partner fall, then came in swinging with a collapsible baton aimed at her skull. Nara slipped left, felt the wind of the strike pass her ear, and countered with a hook to his liver that folded him in half. Combinations. Her father's voice echoed through the chaos. When they give you the body, take the body. When they give you the head, take the head. Take what they give you and make them pay for the gift. 2 down. But footsteps echoed from below. More coming. Too many more. Nara snatched the baton from the second man's limp fingers and ran for the roof access. The lock was rusted. Ancient, held together by habit more than hardware. One solid kick and it gave way, sending her stumbling onto a rooftop she'd never seen before. The night air hit her like a slap. Cold. Sharp. Carrying the distant sound of sirens that were too far away to help. She had maybe 30 seconds before they followed her up. 30 seconds to find another way down, or a place to hide, or a miracle she didn't believe in. The next building was close, maybe 8 feet away. An alley between them that dropped 4 stories to concrete that wouldn't forgive a mistake. Nara looked at the gap, looked at the door behind her, looked at the gap again. Her father had always said she was crazy, fearless in ways that scared him sometimes. Like she didn't understand that dying was a real thing that could happen to her. She understood now. She just didn't care. The door burst open behind her. She was already running. Her feet hit the roof edge at full speed. She pushed off with everything she had, arms windmilling, legs kicking at empty air, the gap yawning beneath her like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. For one eternal second, she was flying. Then she hit the other roof hard, rolled badly, felt something in her shoulder scream in protest. But she was alive. She was across. She was still moving. Behind her, she heard cursing. Someone tried the jump and thought better of it. Someone else was calling for another way around. Good. Let them chase. Let them run themselves ragged trying to catch a ghost. Nara found a fire escape on the far side of the building, rusty but solid. She took it down 3 steps at a time, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, ignoring the exhaustion pulling at her muscles. The alley at the bottom was dark, narrow, smelling of garbage and gasoline. She started running toward the street, toward lights, toward anything that looked like safety. She made it 20 feet before a hand grabbed her from behind. Nara spun, elbow already flying, but this attacker was faster than the others. He caught her arm, redirected her momentum, and had her pinned against the wall before she could recover. She headbutted him. The crack of skull against skull echoed off the brick walls. The man staggered back, blood pouring from his nose, his grip loosening just enough for her to slip free. Nara ran. She burst out of the alley and directly into someone else. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders. She reared back for another headbutt, another elbow. Another desperate attack that would buy her another few seconds of freedom. Nara, stop. It's me. The voice cut through her panic like a blade through fog. She looked up into the face of Rico Delanzo. He was breathing hard, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt spotted with blood that clearly wasn't his. His eyes swept over her, cataloging every injury, every bruise, every sign that someone had touched what he'd already decided was his to protect. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream that this was all his fault, that she'd been fine before he walked into her diner and turned her life into a war zone. But his hands were gentle on her shoulders. His eyes held something she hadn't expected to see. Fear. Genuine, terrified fear. For her. "I'm fine," she managed. "Your face is bleeding." He touched his cheek like he'd forgotten he existed below the neck. "Not my blood. Come on. More are coming." She should have argued. Should have demanded answers, explanations, some reason why the most powerful man in Atlanta was standing in a dirty alley looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Instead, she let him pull her toward a black car idling at the curb. Because right now, enemy or not, Rico Delanzo was the only thing standing between her and the men still hunting in the dark. And Nara Quinn was smart enough to take help where she could find it, even from someone she wasn't sure she could trust. The car smelled like leather and gunpowder. Nara pressed herself against the door, as far from Rico as the confined space would allow. Her shoulder throbbed. Her knuckles were split and bleeding. Every breath felt like someone had wrapped wire around her ribs. But she kept her eyes open, kept watching, kept waiting for whatever came next. Rico sat across from her, speaking quietly into his phone. Coordinates, names, orders that sounded like they belonged in a war room, not the back seat of a luxury sedan. When he finally hung up, silence filled the space between them. "Your men," Nara said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "The ones watching the gym, are they dead?" Rico's jaw tightened. 2 injured, 1 in the hospital. The 4th is still missing. Because of me. Because of Sarin. His eyes met hers. Dark, intense, carrying something that looked almost like guilt. "This isn't your fight, Nara. You got caught in something that started long before you told me off in that diner." She laughed. It hurt. "Then why am I in your car instead of a body bag?" The question hung there, demanding an answer that Rico clearly wasn't ready to give. He looked away first, stared out the window at the city sliding past. "I knew a woman once," he said quietly. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Never complained, never asked for help, just kept going day after day until it killed her. Nara waited. "My mother," he continued. "She taught me that strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can take and still get up. How much the world can break and still not break you." He turned back to her. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, his face looked younger somehow. Less like a crime lord and more like a man who still missed his mama. "You reminded me of her. That day in the diner. The way you stood there and told me exactly what you thought of me without flinching. So this is what? Some kind of mommy issues situation?" The words came out sharper than she intended. But Nara was tired of being treated like a symbol instead of a person. Tired of men projecting their damage onto her and calling it connection. Rico's expression didn't change. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching people like Soren destroy everything good that crosses their path. And I'm good? I think you're the first real thing I've seen in a very long time. The confession landed somewhere in the center of her chest. She didn't want it there. Didn't want to feel anything for this man except the anger that had kept her safe for so long. But her father's voice whispered in her head again. Not all monsters are evil, baby girl. Some of them are just broken in ways they don't know how to fix. Her phone buzzed. One of Rico's men had recovered it from the gym, along with her bag and the few possessions she'd managed to grab before running. She looked at the screen. A blocked number. A text message with just one line. I'm not done with the girl. Next time I take more than her gloves. Nara showed it to Rico without speaking. His face went still. That terrifying calm that she was beginning to recognize as the moment before violence. He knows my number, she said. He's been watching me for weeks, and he's not going to stop. Rico took the phone from her hands. Read the message 3 times, then looked at her with eyes that had made grown men beg for mercy. No, he agreed. He won't stop. Not until I end him. Nara corrected. Until we end him. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Or both. You're not a killer, he said carefully. No, but I'm not a victim either. And I'm done running from men who think they can take whatever they want from me. She held out her hand, waited until he placed her phone back in her palm. I don't trust you, she continued. I don't like you. And when this is over, I'm walking away and never looking back. But right now, Soren is a problem for both of us. So either we handle it together, or we get in each other's way until he wins. Rico studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Together, then. For now. It wasn't an alliance. It wasn't friendship. It was 2 people deciding that surviving mattered more than pride. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. But Nara noticed the blood on Rico's knuckles as the car pulled into an underground garage. Fresh. Dark. The kind that came from hitting someone until they stopped moving. Not his blood, he'd said. She wondered whose it was. Wondered what kind of man she'd just agreed to fight beside. The answer, she suspected, would cost more than she was ready to pay. The safe house looked like a prison dressed up as a penthouse. Steel shutters on every window. Cameras in every corner, men with guns at every entrance, watching Nara like she might explode at any moment. She sat on a leather couch that cost more than her yearly salary and tried to remember the last time she'd felt safe anywhere. Nothing came to mind. Rico was in the next room, making calls that would reshape the power structure of the entire city. She could hear his voice through the walls, calm and controlled, giving orders that men would kill or die to follow. 3 hours ago, she'd been a waitress with a bad temper and a worse luck. Now she was a target at the center of a war she'd never asked to join. Desmond appeared with a first aid kit and a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Boss says to patch you up. Doctor's coming in the morning, but this should hold until then. Nara took the kit without comment, started cleaning her knuckles with antiseptic that burned worse than the original injuries. How long have you worked for him? She asked. Desmond hesitated. Answering questions about Rico wasn't in his job description. 11 years, he finally said, since before he was anyone worth knowing. What was he like? Before? Another hesitation, longer this time. Angry, Desmond admitted. Scared, ready to burn down the whole world just to prove he mattered. He paused. You know the type. Nara did. She'd grown up around men like that. Men who'd been told they were nothing so many times they started believing it. Started fighting just to feel alive. What changed him? His mother died, and I think... Desmond stopped himself, shook his head. That's not my story to tell, But if you want to understand Rico DeLanzo, start there. Start with the woman who made him and the hole she left when she was gone. He disappeared before she could ask anything else. Nara finished bandaging her hands and stared at the closed door between her and Rico. Through the wall, she could hear him still talking, planning, preparing for whatever came next. Soren Vale had started this war with a video and a pair of burned gloves, but Rico was going to finish it. She could hear that certainty in his voice, feel it in the way his men moved around this place like soldiers preparing for battle. The question was where that left her. She wasn't part of Rico's world. Didn't want to be. The money, the power, the violence that shadowed every interaction, none of it matched the life she'd been trying to build from the wreckage of her past. But Soren had made it clear. She couldn't go back to being invisible. Couldn't pretend the last 2 weeks hadn't happened and return to her quiet existence at Mel's diner. She was in this now, whether she liked it or not. The door opened. Rico stepped through, looking exhausted in a way that expensive suits and perfect composure couldn't hide. "My men found the guy who burned your father's gloves," he said. "He's talking. Soren's got a warehouse on the south side where he's planning his next move. We hit it tomorrow night." "We?" Rico met her eyes. "You said together. Did you mean it?" Nara thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her in that gym, about the combinations he'd drilled into her muscle memory, about the last thing he'd ever said to her. "Fight smart, baby girl. But when it matters, fight mean." "I meant it," she said. "But I'm not killing anyone." "You won't have to. Just stay close and let me handle the rough parts." She almost laughed. The idea of Rico DeLanzo asking someone to stay close, to trust him with their safety, seemed impossible given who he was and what he'd built. But here they were. Two broken people trying to survive the same storm. "What happens after?" she asked. "After Soren's gone. After this war is over. What happens to me?" Rico was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Whatever you want. I'll make sure you have enough money to start over anywhere in the world. New name, new life. No one will ever connect you to any of this. And if I want to stay?" The question surprised both of them. Rico's expression shifted. Something vulnerable flickering behind his eyes before the mask slid back into place. "Then you stay, and we figure out the rest as we go." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration. It was just two people admitting that they weren't ready to let go of whatever strange connection had formed between them. Nara nodded slowly, accepted the offer for what it was. "Tomorrow night, then." Tomorrow night. She turned to find a bedroom in this gilded cage, exhaustion finally catching up with the adrenaline that had kept her moving for hours. But Rico's voice stopped her at the door. "Nara." She looked back. "What Soren wants," Rico said quietly, "is to use you to destroy me, to prove I'm weak, to show the world that the great Rico DeLanzo fell apart over a woman he barely knew." He stepped closer. Close enough that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the weight of empires pressing down on his shoulders. "He's wrong about one thing," Rico continued. "I don't barely know you. I've watched you fight. I've seen what you're made of, and I know exactly what you're capable of." "What's that?" Rico's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Burning down everything I've built and making me grateful for the ashes." He walked past her toward his own room, leaving her standing in the hallway with words she didn't know how to process. This is only the beginning, she realized. Soren wants a war, and he's going to use me to start it. But what Soren didn't understand, what Rico was only starting to figure out, was that Nara Quinn had been fighting her whole life. And she'd never lost a battle that mattered. Tomorrow, the war would begin for real. And by the time it was over, nothing in Atlanta would ever be the same. If you want to find out what happens when Nara and Rico finally confront Soren, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me who you think will survive the battle ahead. Your support means the world, and sharing your predictions might just inspire someone else who needs a story about fighting back when the world tries to break you. Until next time, stay strong and remember that sometimes the people the world counts out are the ones who end up changing everything.